Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Encounter Church. We're so glad that you're here with us this morning. We'd love it if you'd stand up and sing. We're going to start off by singing some songs.
You called us out from the depths into your freedom. Our chains are gone. No weapon formed shall prevail. Your word is stronger. We overcome. Your glory resounds through the age. All saints declaring your great renown. Your kingdom forever will stand. We won't be shaken. We will not fear. Our God, a mighty warrior. You're a consuming fire. In victory you reign. We triumph in your name. Jesus, the great commander. You conquered death forever. In victory you reign. We triumph in your name. Your glory resounds through the age. All saints declaring your great renown. Your kingdom forever will stand. 'Cause we won't be shaken. We will not be. I got a mighty warrior. You're a consuming fire. In victory you reign. We triumph in your name. Jesus, the great commander. You conquered death forever. In victory you reign. We triumph in your name.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Encounter Church. How you doing today? You all right? All right, look to somebody you don't know around you and say, I'm glad you're here. Come on, do that. I'm glad you're here. I know all of you, but I'm glad you're here. I don't know all of everyone. I've met some first-time guests today already, and so thank you for coming and being at Encounter Church. We believe that this place, every single Sunday, is a place where you can encounter a God who loves you and a God who has something to say to each and every single one of us, no matter where you are in your journey. So we're glad that you're here. We're going to have a good time today. A little shout out to everyone who helped out with the egg drop yesterday and has, that's right, Egg Drop is one of our community events that we do. 3,800 people attended yesterday, and we had a lot of amazing volunteers. There are a lot of redneck sunburns to prove it, a little bit right here. Well, we're glad that yesterday was an incredible day, so thank you for those that were engaged with it. We are a church who loves to do and serve our community, and so yesterday was a great day. We're going to sing a few more songs, and we would love for you to jump in and sing with us, and then our pastor's going to come in a few moments and continue our series entitled Mastermind. Let's continue to sing together.
And we declare your name is power, exalted one, no name is higher. You stand alone, our strong defender. Above you there's no other, above you there's no other. And we declare your name is power, exalted one, no name is higher. We stand Above you, there's no other. Above you, there's no other. Above you, there's no other. Above you, there's
Sing it
no
out.
other. Our God, a mighty warrior. You're a consuming fire. In victory you reign. We triumph in your name. Jesus, the great commander. You conquered death forever. In victory you reign. We triumph in your name. Our God, a mighty warrior. You're a consuming fire. In victory you reign. We triumph in your name. Jesus, the great commander. You conquered death forever. In victory you reign. We triumph in your name. When I feel like I'm worlds apart, I remember that I have your heart with you. You're all I've got. If I really have to count the cost, not a second or a minute's lost with you. You never ever change. You're the great I am. You always stay the same, and I won't forget. Oh, when I'm empty, you overflow with rage. Your word is gold in the valley. You are my strength in the battle, my victory in the chaos. You are my peace in the desert, my only drink, fearless. I'll take a stand. My God is the great I am. Oh, He's the great I am. You are light, you illuminate and give me life. I can see the sparkle in your eyes for me. In the night, when I'm broken, I will fix my eyes. You're a defender and you win the fight for me. Yeah, yeah. You never ever change, you're the great I am. You always stay the same, and I won't forget. Oh, when I'm empty, you overflow with rage. Your word is gold in the valley. You are my strength in the battle, my victory in the chaos. You are my peace in the desert, my only drink, fearless. I'll take a stand. My God is great I am. Oh, He's the great I am. Oh, He's the great I am. He's the great I am. No kingdom, no power, no ruler can stand before the great I am. No armor, no weapon, no evil can stand before the great I am. No kingdom, no power, no ruler can stand before the great I am. No army, no weapon, no evil can stand before the great I am. No sickness, no pain, no depression
can stand against no hunger, no fear, no injustice can stand against no kingdom, no power, no ruler can stand against the great I am. When I'm empty, you overflow with wreckage. Your word is gold in a valley. You are my strength in a battle, my victory in the chaos. You are my peace in the test, my only drink, fearless. I sing a stand. My God is the great I am. Oh, He's the great I am. He's the great I am. He's the great I am.
So that last song we just got through singing was called I Am. And in the Bible, there are many times where God reveals himself to a person, to a man, and he says, I am who I am. And that means that God is who we need him to be. And what we're going to is a song called Yahweh. And that song, in essence, it's God revealing himself in the form of Jesus. And Jesus, in the old days, they used to call him Yahweh, which means God with us. And that's another form of the word I am, the phrasing, the name.
Spirit of Jesus, living within us, never to fail or forsake, unending promise, heaven inside us, whispers the sound of your name. Holy,
Holy is the Lord, worthy to be praised. Yahweh.
filled with your wonder,
Here I surrender.
held in the mystery
of grace, calling me closer, waking desire, coming alive in your name. Holy is the Lord, worthy to be praised. Fire rising in my soul, all-consuming flame. Yahweh.
He who was and is to come
Is the one who lives in us, one who lives in us, the great I am, Yahweh.
Sing it with us.
He who was and is to come, He is the one who lives in us, the great I am, Yahweh.
He who was and is to come, He is the one who lives in us, the great I am, Yahweh. He who was and is to come, He is the one who lives in us, the great I rising in my soul, all-consuming flame, Yahweh. Holy, holy is the Lord, worthy to be praised, Yahweh. Fire rising in my soul, all-consuming flame, Yahweh.
Let us pray. God, today we just lift up the name of Jesus because He was Yahweh and He still is Yahweh. He's the God who is with us. He is you. And because of that, we can live with hope. We can look to tomorrow without fear. We can rest on the promises that your word give us to live our lives based upon. And it's because of the life and death and resurrection of Jesus that we can all be free. And as a church, we declare that as our prayer this morning. Thank you. And may in everything we do, we look to you, not to ourselves, not to the world, but we look to you for all the things that we need. And it's in Jesus' name we pray all this. Amen. You may be seated.
Good morning. I hope you're having a wonderful day. I don't know about this. I'm going to go a slight little rant real quick. I don't know if you've noticed this thing recently that started happening to us, or it's specifically me, robocalls. Does anyone else get those things, robocalls? Okay, I have to confess, it takes a lot to get me angry. In fact, I don't actually get mad at a lot of things, but the things I do get mad at tend to be ridiculous things. In fact, my wife tends to be like, why are you so upset by that? It's like somebody could offend me and I wouldn't get upset, but you let telemarketers call me throughout the day and it just fires me up. And so I'd kind of gone on this, in my rumination world of perfect revenge of like trying to figure out who they are so I could robocall them. I don't know if you ever think, I sit around being like, if I could only figure out who was behind these robocalls, then I could start robocalling them and it would be awesome, right? And so this thing, it happens to me like throughout the week, starting like a few months back, I was starting to get like 3 to 4 to 5 calls a day. And then they started doing this crazy thing called spoofing, right? Where it looks like a local number. I don't know if you've noticed that. It's like your area code. And so it's like, oh, maybe this is my daughter's school. And so you're like, hello. And they're like, please hold. I'm like, ah, you know, or it's like, hello. And it's like, congratulations. You've just won a 6-night, 7-day trip to Antarctica, you know, or whatever. And you're like, this is ridiculous. I'm going to find them and I'm going to destroy them. But what's been kind of Christmas for me recently is that my carrier, my cell phone carrier, has implemented this new process. And this new process has been awesome because my phone rings and I look down and it says scam likely. Or like a nuisance call, or telemarketer. And I have like felt so empowered. I'm still getting the same amount of phone calls every single day, but it's like I look at my phone and it's like scam likely, and I hit the red button and I feel so powerful when I do. I'm just like, I have the power, right? And what was interesting, even in the midst of my little rant here, is that I realized with my phone that I had the same problem, but a different process, and that changed everything. Same problem, just a different process. And I went from being constantly frustrated, imagining finding these people and robocalling them, to all of a sudden going throughout the course of my day, slightly annoyed, but really kind of unfazed and no longer dreaming vengeful dreams of how to get the robocallers back. And in our series, as we continue today, called Mastermind, I want to talk about one of the most common pitfalls, one of the most common minefields that we can step into. And I think that the same observation I noticed with my robocall problem and your robocall problem, because 30% of phone calls in North America are robocalls, right? It's extraordinary. 26 billion last year. There'll be more this year. But that what transformed me in the midst of all that was a new process introduced to an old problem. And today I want to look at this common minefield that we all face regularly, this same problem we're all used to called negativity and discouragement. And I want to talk about a new process to deal with it. Because I believe that discouragement and negativity, the same way that robocalls in my life were completely transformed because a new process was introduced, I think that we can introduce a process into our lives that doesn't remove negativity, but it at least helps to kind of negate its effects a little bit. Because I don't know about you, but the biggest enemy, the thing that often derails me in my life and my journey, is discouragement. And that many of us live with its constant kind of pressure in our lives in subtle, small, and sometimes significant ways. And to dive into that process, I want us to look at a story. It's perhaps a story you've never even heard before. That even if you grew up in church, unless you're one that reads the Bible pretty regularly, there's chances are you've never even come across this story. It's in a letter in the Old Testament. Remember, the Christian Bible is a 2-volume set. There's the Old Testament and there's the New Testament. And inside the Old Testament is a series of books that chronicles kind of a large series of different kind of genres. And primarily its focus is on Jewish history and the promise of the promised land and the promise of the promised one. And in the course of the period of Jewish history, kind of situated in the middle of the Old Testament, is a period of history that historians called the kind of the post-exile period. So the 30-second summary of Jewish history, thousands of years of ancient Jewish history, is that Israel is a people before they're a place. That's what they're called. They're called Israel. Then they physically begin to dwell in this land, and that land becomes known as Israel. Now, Israel is a unique country in the fact that they have God as their king. This theocratic government is what it would be called. And the whole contract, as long as God is their king, they're a nation. And because of some kind of periods of time where they've lost sight of that contract, what happens is they become open to outside influence, and ultimately they're conquered through a series of enemies that you probably heard about in high school ancient history, Babylonians and the Assyrians. Now, they come in, they conquer them, and what they do in that time period is devastating. They essentially take the Jewish people out of their land, back to their land, and in the course of that time period, what happens to those people is that they even lose the ability to write their alphabet. For those who appreciate ancient history, obviously I like that kind of stuff. What is amazing is that the Jewish alphabet is transformed. The alphabet, if you ever see modern Jewish language, it's actually not the same alphabet used during this time period. They lost it. They lost their ability because it was illegal to write in the Hebrew language. So when they finally left, they had to adopt a new language. And so there was something called Aramaic script that was present in the ancient world. They actually took that alphabet and kind of forced their language into it. So imagine, I mean, that's a lot of backstory, but imagine as a people, we forgot our language. We forgot our ability. We lost the ability to even write our language. Language is so tied to identity that would be a devastating experience. And so here's the ancient people, and what they're doing in the process is now they're allowed to move back to where they came from, and they've really lost who they are. And in the process, they find when they arrive in Jerusalem that the city has been destroyed. It's been devastated. Because the same enemies that conquered them, that wanted to erase their culture, wanted to erase their language, wanted to erase who they were, made sure that they physically destroyed everything too. It would be like us being conquered by a foreign nation. We're taken back to their country, and then when we finally are able to come back here, everything that we've ever known has been devastated. Boston no longer has a skyline. Fenway is gone. Your homes have been burned to the ground, and all you see is rubble. I mean, it's devastating. Especially back then, because back then, there wasn't things called deadbolt locks. There wasn't the modern version of building that we have today. Most homes back then were essentially shapen mud huts, or with thatch roofs, or deep kind of mud pressed to form tiles on top of a roof. And so these people arrive and everything is gone. And the leader, this man who the book of Nehemiah is written about, he is the one in charge of rebuilding it all. So he's leading a group of people who have been broken, who've lost who they were, into a city that had been destroyed. And the hallmark of a city's security, this very ancient concept that's not present in our world today, was this idea of a city wall. So in the ancient world, the boundaries of a city was its wall. And these walls were massive, 30 feet tall. They would be large enough for chariots to ride on. Towers would be set up because the military would occupy those walls to protect invading enemies, because oftentimes wars were fought at the walls of cities. And Jerusalem's wall was gone, which meant that these people had no sense of safety and security. All the enemies that had defeated them the first time still live around them. And so Nehemiah steps into this situation, and all of that backstory lets you know that this is a man who is stepping into a situation that by definition is completely steeped in discouragement and disappointment. And what Nehemiah does over the course of the chapter we're about to read is lay out a process for us that same problem ends up being transformed because of a new process, a different process. This wall is the focal point of most of Nehemiah because this is the biggest project he undertakes while he's there. And in chapter 4 of Nehemiah, the letter, we begin to join the story already in progress. Nehemiah has finally said, let's begin to build this wall. And he's rallied the people, and they begin. And as the moment that they step into it, discouragement breaks out. And so as I read through it, you're going to notice the words on the screen are going to be, they'll be on the screen, but we also have created an app for you. So if you're new here, you can go to encounterchurch.com/app. It's a free resource that we've created, and you can download that. And inside is a message notes, and they've also been preloaded for you as well in there to follow along. It says, when Sanballat is an enemy, heard that they were rebuilding the wall, he became angry and was greatly incensed. He ridiculed the Jews, and in the presence of his associates in the army of Samaria, one of their enemies, he said, what are these feeble Jews doing? Will they restore their wall? Will they offer sacrifices? Will they finish in a day? Can they bring the stones back to life from these heaps of rubble, burned as they are? Tobiah the Ammonite, who was at his side, said, what are they even building? Even a fox climbing up on it would break down the walls of the stones. Now, you have to realize Nehemiah actually writes this from his memory, from his experience. He's living this, and so he's journaling what's going out. But what I love about the history is you want to pause there, because what would happen as he's writing is he would have heard their laughter. You can kind of sense it, right? Tobiah's like, yeah, even a fox would destroy what they have right now. Because a fox is this tiny little dog. And they're like, even a small little animal bumping up against their wall would just make it crumble. Now, walls were meant to protect you from armies. And yet, he's like, their wall can't even handle a dog. And the guys would have like, ha, 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 ha. Maniacal laugh. And so what starts at the beginning of this chapter is a vicious cycle. You have ridicule, and then you have a response. Nehemiah says, hear us, O God. He writes this prayer down. For we are despised. Turn their insults back to their heads. Give them over as plunder in the land of captivity. Do not cover up their guilt or blot out their sins from your sight, for they have thrown insults in the face of the builders. So we rebuilt the wall till all of it reached half its height, for the people worked with all their heart. So, woohoo, right? Ridicule, response. But verse 7, but when Sanballat, Tobiah, the Arabs, the Ammonites, and the people of Ashdod heard that the repairs to Jerusalem's wall had gone ahead and that the gaps were being closed, they were very angry. So now, if you've noticed, if you're counting, they have even more discouragement. What was kind of a quartet of ridicule has now become a massive choir of ridicule. They've went and recruited other people, and now they've all shown up, and they're heaping ridicule. And it says they all plotted together to come and fight against Jerusalem and stir up trouble against it. Verse 9, but we prayed to our God and posted a guard day and night to meet this threat. Meanwhile, the people in Judah said, the strength of the laborers is giving out, and there's so much trouble that we cannot even rebuild the wall. Also, our enemies said, before they know it or see us, we will be right there among them, and we will kill them and put an end to their work. Then the Jews who lived near them came and told us 10 times over, whenever you turn, they will attack us. I mean, it is this constant threat, this constant cycle. And in the ancient Hebrew way of communicating stories, Nehemiah says that they did it 10 times over, which is a subtle but very powerful way of saying it was nonstop. 10 times in the ancient Hebrew writing system was a way of saying it never stops. He's like, this is where we are. Constant ridicule, constant negativity, constant discouragement. And to top it all off, even our lives are in danger. And yet, Nehemiah manages, in the midst of all of this pressure, to practice a process that you and I, as distant as this passage may be, he puts in a process and that is just as powerful for us today as it was for him 2,500 years ago. You see, when we face discouragement, when we are pressed with negativity, there's oftentimes a lot of emotion and feelings that come with that. We tend to be distracted from what we were doing, right? When someone says something to you, when you start out, you're going to get healthy. It's January 1, and someone makes that comment. Well, isn't that what you said last year? It could be small, but it leaks in, and all of a sudden, where you were originally focused, you've been distracted by what they've said, and now you're trying to churn up excuses why this year is different than the last 2 years. Because discouragement distracts.
But it doesn't just distract. Discouragement can actually be destructive. John Gottman, who's a researcher in relationships, specifically in marriage, actually became famous for chronicling this magic number called the 6-to-1 ratio, where he could predict, based on watching a video, a couple's likelihood of divorce just by the number of discouragements spoken in relation to the positive compliments. That if he watched a conversation between a couple in their research, and he noticed that there was less than 6 positive statements to every 1 negative statement, that with each notch down, it increased the likelihood of divorce. This was powerful. He could walk away and they would make predictions based on the likelihood of relationships continuing. And those who had a really low ratio, almost a 1-to-1 or 2-to-1 or even under that, it was a negative 1-to-1, that what would typically happen is that within a year or so, those relationships had already imploded. Because discouragement is a destructive force. Subsequent researchers have even documented this in our workplaces. It's not a 6-to-1 ratio. It's a little higher because of the relational aspect of it, but it's more closer to 13-to-1. That when researchers observed relational context and dynamics in boardrooms and in meetings, when there was a number less than 13-to-1, it typically meant that the longevity of that team was at stake, that people were going to turn over. Why? Because they're in a relational environment where they're hearing more discouragement than encouragement. And so this power of discouragement is destructive. And what Nehemiah does that's different is that Nehemiah doesn't get distracted by discouragement. He actually does something that I think you and I could learn from. He gathers people together in verse 14. He says, after I looked things over, I stood up and said to the nobles, the officials, and the rest of the people, do not be afraid of them. Remember the Lord, who is great and awesome, and fight for your families, your sons, your daughters, your wives, and your homes. When our enemies heard that, we were aware of their plot and that God had frustrated it. We all returned to the wall, each to our own work. Now, did you notice that? What did Nehemiah do? He says, come here, come here. They all gather around, and what does he do? He reminds them why they're doing it. They had gotten distracted by the discouragement. They had gotten overwhelmed by the pressure and the negativity. And he pulls them all together, and he says, remember why we're doing this. Fight for your families. Fight for your lives. Fight for your homes. Do this for God. He causes them to remember their why. I came across an interesting article about the education of Danish children. And it turns out that when Danish children are growing up, in a lot of classrooms, they'll have a poster or even a physical button in the room with the word PID. It's spelled P-Y-T in the Danish language. And that this word is part of the teaching instruction. It's an interesting word. We don't really genuinely have a true kind of corollary to it in the English, but this word PID is something that is taught to Danish children as they grow up, as they deal with frustration and negativity, even to the point that the kids are taught to walk over and hit the button. You see, what PID is that when you face negativity, when you face discouragement, when you're trying to work hard and you face kind of a roadblock, the problem is hard, you're kind of dealing with peer pressure or negativity within the classroom, this idea of PID, this really essential skill, is a call for them. It's a short word, but it has a huge meaning. It means you step back and you refocus, not overreact. And so this idea, when you're as a Danish little boy or girl, you're taught PID. And when you hear PID, you know, step back, get distance, rethink, step back in. Sometimes PID, if you ever travel or around Danish people, you hear them just say PID in the midst of small frustrations in life. Someone cuts them off and they're like, PID. And it's something they learned early on. It's a mental activation. It says step back, get some distance, reorient, then step back in. And this is what I think Nehemiah is doing in this process. He's essentially hitting the ancient Hebrew equivalent of PID with them. He's like, take a step back. Why are we building this wall in the first place? It's for your families. It's for your safety. It's for our security. It's for our hope. It's a good thing. Because when you're in the middle of trying to do something good, when you're in the middle of trying something hard, because hard things are hard, right? Having a great relationship is hard. Having a great relationship with your children is hard. Doing a great job in your work is hard. No good thing is an easy thing. All the great things are hard. And when you start off on the journey towards that hard good thing, whether it's personal health, whether it's financial health, whether it's you moving to break out of an addiction, whether it's you moving to restore and to rebuild and to develop a deeper relationship with your spouse or significant other, or whether it's you're trying to build a foundation with your kids, those hard things typically are moving towards and facing a headwind. Sometimes that headwind is what's inside your head, and sometimes it's what's being said out of other people's. And the ability to hit PID, step back, and gain distance protects us from being sucked into the power of discouragement, the emotion, the negativity, all those voices that start to churn inside of our head. And we lose sight of why we wanted to work on our relationship, because you remember the vows, or you remembered when you first started dating that person, what the relationship could be. Or you remember the moment you held your child for the first time, and all the hope and potential was so present in that moment. And you uttered a prayer in your heart, I'll never leave you. I'm always going to be here for you. And then life makes it hard. And it's so easy to be discouraged and to be derailed and to be distracted by the emotions that come out of that moment. But by stepping back like Nehemiah did, getting some distance. Remember, he says, as I look things over, gain the distance so that you can step back in with a refocus. Because refocusing is an essential first step in the process of navigating negativity. Because what happens is this process builds, and Nehemiah's ability to gain distance, to separate from the emotion of the present moment, sets him up to do something that's essential. It's actually the uniqueness about Nehemiah in this chapter that stands out, not just to his enemies, but even to the people he leads. If you notice that when in the course of this long passage, this cycle that's playing out, what happens in the midst of the cycle is something that happens to us regularly too. Nehemiah is dealing with the enemies. They show up. They start to say certain things. And it's interesting that through the passage, the people start to repeat the same words that have been spoken over to them. That verses 10 through 12, when you see this dialogue where they're like, we're going to attack you, we're everywhere. And then the people start saying, they're going to attack us, they're everywhere. The people are literally repeating the words that the enemy said to them. That's one of the power of discouragement, is it starts to loop inside of our mind. Some of you have walked away from hard things. Some of you have given up on relationships. Some of you have given up on moving towards financial and personal health because someone said something to you one day that you've never been able to forget. And the power wasn't the day they said it. The power came when the day came when you started to say it as if it was true. When you started repeating what was said about you. When you started echoing what you once heard. That's the truly destructive power of discouragement, is when the person's not even needed there to have the same effect. And this is what happens to the people. We're told by Nehemiah, so that we have a context, that this happens 10 times over. Why? Because Nehemiah wants us to understand that these people, they've heard it so much that it's now what they're saying to one another. It's what they believe. And Nehemiah, by gaining distance and refocusing on why they're doing this in the first place, why they're trying to rebuild the wall, it puts them in a position to think differently, which is the second critical step. It's not just a refocus, step back and refocus. It's also to step back in having rethought the whole situation. Nehemiah comes in, and where everyone else is repeating, where everyone else is complaining and griping and saying, well, this is what they said. This is so true. This is what's going to happen to us. Nehemiah comes in and it says in verse 13, therefore, I stationed some of the families behind the lowest points of the wall at the exposed places, posting them by families with their swords, spears, and bows. This is a really interesting thing, right? Nehemiah, everyone's talking about how they're going to be attacked, how they're going to be overwhelmed, how the forces are going to crush them. They're just repeating what's already been said. Nehemiah steps in, and instead of focusing on the problem, Nehemiah focuses on the solution. He says, okay, if they're going to attack us, because remember, he's refocused. We need to build this wall. Why? Because it's for our personal security and safety. Now I'm going to rethink. He steps back in, and he's not problem-oriented. He's solution-oriented. He steps in and says, okay, if they're going to attack us, where are they going to attack us? Let's put people there. Everyone else is concerned they're going to be attacked. Nehemiah says, well, that's the plan. Okay, well, easy. Well, if part of the wall is finished, let's put people armed at the parts of the wall where it's not finished. Nehemiah steps in with a plan. He doesn't have panic. He doesn't surrender. He says, okay, let's set up a way of dealing with this. I watched our team actually deal with this. Jason was talking about the egg drop yesterday. It was the best one we've ever had. It was extraordinary. And what was neat for me to kind of watch in the back, because I have nothing to do with the event, is our team orchestrating it and executing it. And so about 3 or 4 weeks ago, we got a series of pretty like nasty emails, calls. People started rallying, tried to cancel our event. It was pretty kind of just nasty stuff. Like, and it went beyond criticism. Like, we like criticism because criticism helps you get better. But this went to like presumptuous stuff, personal attacks, ridicule. There was this concerted effort, a small group of people. I mean, just a small group of people, like that front row size. But a small group of people, not you personally, just the row. Okay? We had one of them come here today because we wanted to make a personal example. Okay? And so we had this little small handful of people who started to work together to push back on this event. And when it first happened, there was a little bit of a sense of panic. Here are a few people who've completely caused us to lose sight of the thousands of people who were registered, who were going to show up. You ever notice that? Like, it doesn't matter how great your day was, how many great things you got told. That one person said something to you, and that's what you take home with you. It's the same way, right? We're dealing with this. We're processing through it. And all their words and their nasty emails and their links and all their statements kind of flooding our inbox. I say flood. It was like a trickle, but it feels like a flood, right? So I can't believe I got another one of these emails 4 hours later, being inundated with it, right? And so, but you feel all of it because that's what happens when you're in the middle of it. And I was so proud of them because I got to sit in a meeting and watch them because they were like, okay, let's respond to this situation by looking for solutions. If they're going to give us all the reasons this is the worst event in history, because it was basically that. Now, I'm not exaggerating. It was like, what are you doing to the children of this world? Was the heart of some of these passages. We were like, oh my goodness. What was cool was, so our team got together and they said, well, okay, that's helpful. Let's think about that from a solution standpoint. What if this was the worst event we've ever had? Why would it have been the worst event? Let's go ahead and solve some of those problems before they even happen. And I sat in a room and I watched our leadership team that oversaw this event. And they thought through all the worst case possible scenarios, from like nationwide cellular outages and backup plans with paper in case the networked cell towers went down. I mean, to like, crazy things with the helicopter. I mean, it was amazing. I'm just sitting in the room and I'm like, they are doing exactly what Nehemiah did. Instead of panicking, they made a plan. So what you did it 2 years ago and it didn't work out? That doesn't mean it's 2 years ago. You learned something 2 years ago. You learned that if you didn't have a schedule and if you didn't have a plan, you didn't wake up in the morning and go to the gym. Because Only a few of you wake up in the morning and actually want to go to the gym. The rest of us need an equivalent of a pep talk to get out of bed, right? Or some kind of plan where we've already picked out our clothes and it's on our schedule and we're stuck. We have to go do that, right? So what? 3 years ago, it was the worst it ever been. It doesn't mean this year. It doesn't mean you can't experience financial freedom this year because you start spending less than you bring in. Yeah, 3 years ago, you thought credit cards were fun. Well, now it's not because you learned 3 years ago, right? And that's the beauty of what Nehemiah's solution-oriented thinking does, is it pulls you back into the game and it gives you a realization, it gives you an orientation where you realize that while other people can just gripe about their problems, you see the gift with the problem because there's also a solution attached. There is no problem, no word, no discouragement that has ever been spoken over you that does not have a solution to be solved attached to it. There is a better version of you. There is a freer version of you. There is a saving version of you. There is a healthy version of you. And the solution-oriented thinking is to step back and to realize there's some steps to access that version of you instead of sitting over here and giving into the chorus of the haters and the naysayers inside your head and around you, telling you all the reasons it can't happen. And Nehemiah recognized by stepping back, refocusing, and rethinking, he could step back in with a secret weapon that no one else saw coming. Nehemiah understood that with the right power supply, even a setback could be turned into a setup for something extraordinary, which is the last part of this process. It is the third rail that fuels the entire thing. It's the plug-in that makes the power happen. That throughout this story, this cycle, Nehemiah has a tendency. I don't know if you noticed it. Verse 4, verse 9, verse 14. He does it time and time again. He prays. Sounds really simple. But what Nehemiah does is he understands something about prayer that I think for many of us, even of those with faith, Christians, that we miss. We oftentimes treat prayer as a last resort. Right? Even when I was not a spiritual person at all, I still treated prayer as a last resort. I wasn't a Christian in college, but I sure prayed when I didn't study. Because I was like, man, if there's some divine being up there that knows the A+ squared of something with that calculus, I'll take it. I don't care where it comes from. But most of us, because prayer seems so vague or weird, or I don't understand how it works. I don't understand how my cell phone works, but I use it, right? It's so strange to us that oftentimes it's the last thing we do. But Nehemiah, it's the first thing he does. He faces ridicule and he prays. God, you heard their words. I heard their words too. Help me to reorient, to refocus, to rethink this situation. And it's because I think Nehemiah understood that the power was not in the process. The power was in the prayer that fueled the process. Because what will happen in the course of everyday life is you and I will become discouraged. You and I will hear words, experience feelings, and we're going to constantly leak the strength and that fuel that's going to fall to the ground. And Nehemiah had an ability to reconnect with God, and that would infuse him with the power and the strength that he needed to keep moving forward. And that for some of you, for those who are in this room who are Christians, I would encourage you, start making prayer the first thing you do, not the last thing you do. It doesn't have to be there's not a magic formula. There's no special words that you have to utter. There's no special connection you need. It's not dial up. It's not it's just this. It's talking to God. Right? Imagine if you had a child and they walked into the room and before they opened their mouth, you said, now I need you to say this phrase 17 times. And then I need you to speak to me in this way. Oh, holy reverent Father, thou'th with the baldeth head, heareth my simple petition placed before thee. Right? I'd be like, child, are you okay? Did you get hit in the head? Is something wrong? Like, there are no special formulas. When Jesus was trying to teach his disciples to pray, because this was a struggle even back then, what does he do? He says, pray like this, our Father in heaven. Completely reorients the way people think about prayer. One of the most powerful sentences ever uttered. Because up until that point, no one even ever put God in the Father box. And he says, the way you should pray is you should talk to him the way you would talk to your parent, who loves you, who cares about you. My daughter doesn't need someone to come into the room and say, oh, by the way, Chris, your daughter wants to talk to you. She just walks in the room and talks to me. She doesn't need to know someone. She doesn't need to text or call someone. She doesn't need to put money in a box to make that happen. You don't need me to pray for you. He's waiting on you. And there's a power there. A power that he has, that he stands willing to give to you in the midst of your hardest, darkest moments. I'm not saying that when you pray, the circumstances will always change, but I am promising you that when you pray, the power for you to walk through your circumstances will come. That I've shared part of my struggle last year in the storyline that we walked through, and the thing that got me through that was sometimes hourly, sometimes minute by minute, I would have to walk into these little things where I'm just like, God, I need your strength. I need your joy. I need your perspective. Because I'm overwhelmed. I'm just completely discouraged right now. And that he, as a good father, stands ready to hear you. You don't need anything but you and your words to speak to him. He does the heavy lifting. He has the power. And it's one of those transformative things that I think that Nehemiah understood. One of my heroes is a guy named George Mueller, who oversaw an orphanage in Bristol back in the 1800s. And George Mueller kept track of every prayer that he prayed to God. Over the course of his short time that he oversaw this orphanage that he started in Bristol called Ashley Down Orphanage, he accounted 15,000 different prayers God answered. From food to supplies to necessities of life, and over 10,000 orphans were taken care of, brought in off the streets, nurtured, given education and access to, like, not just the essentials of life, but things that would help them well into adulthood. Because George Mueller understood that prayer is the first thing we do, not the last thing we do when we face a challenge. And he was so committed and believed so much in the power of prayer, he actually kept track of what he asked for, and then he would record when the prayer was answered. And over 50,000, you can access his journal and count 50,000 of those prayers answered that he prayed. Because I think that there is a version of you. There is someone that you wish you could be that's on the other side of that hard thing that's in front of you. For some of you, that hard thing is you coming to terms with faith and wrestling through who is Jesus and what did he do for you. And that you've been in here and you've processed through that, and your hard thing is wrestling that to the ground. For some of you, your hard thing is an addiction. For some of you, your hard thing is that you are drowning in debt and it is crushing you. For some of you, your hard thing is believing that your relationship could be better, or that you could have a career that you look forward to every single day, or that your children, your adult children, and you could have a vibrant relationship. All of us have something on the other side of hard that we long for. We're just not sure we have the strength to make it through. And what Nehemiah does for us is he shows us a process that the discouragement we will face doesn't have to derail us in the journey. that it is possible to move forward, to keep walking, and to experience the good and those great things. Because most of us, if I'm being honest, most of us hit a breaking point and we think it's our breakdown. And what we fail to miss is that we all on the journey through the hard come to a breaking point. But I think it's not a breakdown point. It can actually become a breakthrough point. But the challenge is will you keep walking? Will you keep moving? Will you cry out to God, God, give me strength for the next step? He's not a genie. He's not going to come in and swoop and erase all the bad choices you made or that I made. Let's be honest. Some of us have put ourselves in bad places and no one else did it. We did it. We orchestrated the disaster in our life with the decisions. And the good news of the Christian faith is that there is a God who's not sitting up in heaven saying, well, if you had only done this, I can't help you. God only helps those who help themselves. No, we see through Jesus a God who steps into our brokenness and brings beauty and grace. And for those who are willing to lift their eyes and to cry out for hope, he gives hope. He gives strength. He gives forgiveness. And that power, who he is, can transform our situations and our circumstances. And he can take those moments, our breaking points, and turn them into breakthrough points. Turning points in our story where who we are begins to transform because of what he brought into our lives then. And just in case you need proof, Nehemiah 6 verses 15 says, so the wall was completed on the 25th of Elul in 52 days. When archaeologists discovered a portion of the wall Nehemiah built, they discovered that the wall was 9 feet thick. This thing wasn't going to fall when dogs climbed on it. And when subsequent wall builders would come into Jerusalem and add on to Nehemiah's wall, they continued to build onto the pieces that he had already laid the foundation for. And I love it. When I was writing this passage, I wrote down the line, bam, right after this. It's like really profoundly theologically deep. I just wrote, bam. I was like, because standing on the other side of the 9-foot wall that was 30 feet tall were all the haters, were all the blame kind of naysayers, all the people who had the reasons it would never work, the racists who said and degraded and downgraded everything about those people building the wall. They were on the other side of that 9-foot wall. And Nehemiah, like the Jeffersons, was living it on up in the safety and the security of what those people together, overcoming discouragement, had actually accomplished and built. They had built security. They had recaptured their why. They had stepped into the how. They had formed a new plan. And what came up around them was a great wall around them that protected them, secured them, and enabled them to not just flourish and thrive, but to even reconnect with God ultimately when they reestablished their temple worship in Jerusalem for the next 500 years, became a people that were safe and secure and lived there. This is why I wrote bam. Because your discouragers, your haters, your naysayers, if you keep moving, one day they'll be on the other side of your wall too. It may be the voices you heard growing up, or it may be the voices that you hear in your present. But I'm telling you, in the future, there can be a wall, and on the other side of that wall is all the haters and the discouragers who told you it could never be done, that you could never be healthy, that you could never make better choices, that you could never be a Christian or a religious person, that you could never be a good husband or a good father or a good wife. You could never be financially free. Because when we step into this process and we connect to that power source, amazing things can happen. Let's pray. God, thank you. Thank you for the power that you bring when we connect to you. Thank you for the hope that you bring, for the life. I pray even now as we're processing, God, I pray that you would help us to apply this process to the discouragement we've heard in our own heads, from the insecurities that haunt us, from the negativity that stalks us. That today we would draw a new line in the sand, and that we would, through your power, find strength to take one step. And that with each step, we would move towards you building something new, you building something powerful in our lives. Thank you for the opportunity to be able to speak and to say and to do the extraordinary. And it's in your name, Jesus, the powerful name of Jesus, that I pray. Amen. I want to thank you for being here at Encounter Church today. We're going to close out in the next 5 minutes the same way that we do every single week, through a song. And it's because we believe, especially in this Mind-Filled series, that we all brought in these minds. Where there's these little trigger points, and that discouragement, negativity is something that we all deal with regularly. And so the ability to be able to say, okay, here's how I'm going to apply this process and access this power to navigate my negativity and my discouragement that I'm currently facing, and to experience the better, the other side of hard. And in some ways, this church is a testament to that. We were able to do yesterday something that if you'd have told me 4 years ago, we would have done. I wouldn't have believed you, because 4 years ago, the week of the egg drop, the first time we ever did it, it was canceled by different people almost 6 different times. I mean, that Thursday before the egg drop, I was brought in and it was like, we're canceling this event. I mean, it was just constantly uphill struggle. And then yesterday, to see almost 4,000 people, to see your faces serving in an event that you paid for, that your generosity paved the way for. It was a cool thing. It was just a reminder, even I was stepping in today, that when we step in it together, there is so much more possible. That's why as a church we're able to do those things, is because together in our generosity, for those who call Encounter Church home, we can do more together in our community and in and around the world. It's why, as a people, we create group context so that together we can step in and experience. It's why we have serving opportunities, because we believe the we can be a greater thing than just the me walking through life by itself. But above all those things is a he that Nehemiah understood was the ultimate power that could transform any situation. And so while our team moves around with the baskets, and for those who call Encounter Church home to practice their generosity, or for those who are new to Encounter Church home to let us know how we can pray for you or step into your storyline with you, I want to invite you to stand, because our band's going to lead us in a song and a declaration that reminds and points us to a God who is greater, a God who is stronger, a God who is able to do immeasurably more than we could ask or imagine, a God who is to take our breaking points and to turn them into breakthroughs, a God who can handle our setbacks and through his strength and his spirit turn it into a setup of something new, something extraordinary, something true. And it's our God, that God, who is able to do those things. And so today they want to lead us in a song and a declaration to a God who is able to step into any circumstance and transform it. Let's sing.
Darkness you shine, out of the ashes we rise. There's no one like you, none like you. Our God is greater, our God is stronger. God, you are high. what can stand against? And if our God is for us, then who could ever stop us? And if our God is with us, then what can stand against? Then what can stand against? Our God is greater, our God is stronger. God, you are higher than any other. Our God is healer, awesome in power. Our God, our God. And if our God is for us, and if our God is with us, then what can stand against? And if our God is for us, then who could ever stop us? And if our God is with us, then what can stand against? Then what can stand against? What can stand against? Our God is greater, our God is stronger. God, you are higher than any other. Our God is healer, awesome in power. Our God, our God. One more time. Say, our God is greater, our God is stronger. God, you are higher than any other. Our God is healer, awesome in power. Our God, our God.
Thank you for being at Encounter Church today. We hope today's message was encouraging to you as you think about how you can be faced with that discouragement. If you're looking for more help with that and how to combat that, we encourage you to talk to our pastors. Feel free to stop by Starting Point. They will be waiting for you to talk with you there. You can also contact them through our app as well. I also want to remind you that on April 21st, we will have our Easter service, and there will be two, 9:30 a.m. and 11 a.m. This is a great time to invite your family and friends to check out Encounter Church. We'd love to see all of you and you bringing them as well. So keep that in mind. We hope you have a wonderful week. Enjoy the rest of your day. Enjoy that sunshine. We look forward to seeing you next Sunday.